For 20 years, Red Skelton made millions of people laugh on television. He played the silly drunk, the happy clown, and the innocent kid who always got into trouble. But the people who worked behind the scenes with him knew another side of Red. They even had a secret name for it. They called it the Red Skelton Dirty Hour. What happened in those private rehearsals was so shocking that, if the public had known about it, his career could have ended overnight. Later, when he died, lawyers found something hidden in his will, a clause that had the power to erase everything he had worked for. It turned out that the man America thought they knew was hiding a much darker story. Red Skelton's life began with hardship. He was born on July 18, 1913, in Vincennes, Indiana, just 2 months after his father died. His father, Joseph Ehart, had once worked as a circus clown before trying to settle down as a grocer. But tragedy struck when he died in a circus tent collapse, the very world he had tried to leave behind. That left Red's family broken and without support. His mother, Ida May, was left alone to raise 4 children in crushing poverty. She took any job she could, scrubbing floors, running elevators, anything to keep food on the table. People in town openly called the family hopeless. Parents even warned their daughters to stay away from Red, saying he would never become anything. Instead of giving up, Red used those harsh words as motivation. At just 7 years old, he worked as a newsboy, shouting headlines on the street corners. He didn't do it for fun. His family needed the money. That job gave him more than just a few coins. It gave him the chance to study people. He learned how to read faces, how to make people smile, and how laughter could grab attention. That lesson stayed with him forever. At age 10, something incredible happened. While selling newspapers outside the Pantheon Theater, Red was noticed by the famous comedian Ed Wynn. Wynn bought every paper Red had, then invited him inside the theater. He showed Red what show business looked like backstage. The lights, the energy, the excitement. For a poor boy with no father and no clear future, it was like stepping into another world. That moment gave Red his dream, and he chased it with everything he had. Not long after, Red quit school and joined Doc Lewis's traveling medicine show. At only 10 years old, he traveled across Indiana, Arkansas, Illinois, and Missouri, performing comedy while helping sell fake medicine cures. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave him the training he needed. By the time he was 14, Red joined the John Lawrence Stock Company to act in traveling theater productions. He earned $15 a week, which felt like a fortune. But there was a problem. Whenever he tried to perform serious roles, audiences laughed. He couldn't make them cry. Instead, they found him funny. Eventually, the company abandoned him, leaving him unpaid and alone. But Red didn't stop. Soon, he found work on the Cotton Blossom showboat, drifting down the Missouri River. There, he danced, sang, told jokes, and even performed in minstrel shows, which sadly included blackface, something common in entertainment at the time. Each night, he had to win over a fresh crowd. It taught him how to adapt quickly and never let an audience stay quiet. The showboat saved him, turning him into a professional performer. By 15, Red had already worked in medicine shows, vaudeville, minstrel acts, and even circuses, following in his father's footsteps as a clown. He did whatever he could to keep performing, including hosting Depression-era dance marathons where couples would dance until they collapsed from exhaustion. While most kids his age were still in school, Red was already learning under the spotlight. In 1930, Red's life changed again when he met Edna Stillwell, a 16-year-old usher at the Pantages Theater in Kansas City. She entered a dance marathon Red was hosting, won it, and boldly told him his jokes weren't funny enough. That honesty got his attention. A year later, they married. Edna became more than his wife. She was his manager, his writer, and his biggest supporter. She helped him get better pay, studied with him so he could earn a diploma, and even wrote many of his jokes. Even after they divorced 13 years later, she kept writing for him, knowing his comedic timing better than anyone else. Their big break came in Montreal when they saw people dipping donuts into coffee. That sparked the idea for the famous Donut Dunkers sketch, where Red acted out different funny ways people dunk donuts. It was simple but hilarious, and audiences loved it. The act carried them to New York, where they performed at Loew's State Theater in 1937, their first taste of the big leagues. That one sketch opened doors to radio, movies, and even the White House. President Franklin Roosevelt invited Red to perform, and soon he became a regular host at Roosevelt's birthday celebrations. By 1937, Red's career hit a turning point when he performed the Donut Dunkers routine on Rudy Vallee's radio show. The audience response was huge, with fan letters pouring in. He was invited back multiple times, and in 1938, NBC gave him his own show, Avalon Time. With Edna's help writing material, Red adapted his physical comedy to radio, creating new characters and voices that audiences loved. By 1941, he launched the Raleigh cigarette program, which introduced some of his most famous characters. One of them was Junior, the mean Whittle Kid, who became so popular that his catchphrase, "I doed it," showed up in newspapers, war headlines, and even on the side of a World War II bomber plane. Another beloved character, Clem Kadiddlehopper, was inspired by a real neighbor from Indiana. Red Skelton was no longer just a performer. He was becoming one of the most famous comedians in America. Red Skelton's career kept moving forward even after he left the army, but the war changed him in ways few people knew. Before being drafted, he was one of the most popular comedians on radio and in movies. His clean humor, funny characters, and warm style made him a family favorite. He could make people laugh without relying on dirty jokes or controversial topics, which set him apart from many others in the business. But when the war came, none of that mattered. He was drafted in March 1944, at the very height of his success. At first, the army treated him like any other soldier. He trained, marched, and lived the tough military life. But because of who he was, Red was constantly asked to perform. He would do comedy shows for the troops in between drills, sometimes as many as 12 shows in one day. It was exhausting, and slowly, his health began to break down. He wrote in his diary about feeling faint during a performance, forgetting parts of his routine, and struggling to keep up the energy. Still, he pushed through because he wanted to give the soldiers something to smile about. In April 1945, Red was sent to Italy. There his schedule became brutal. In just 6 days he performed 41 shows. Soldiers loved him, and chaplains even said he lifted morale wherever he went, but inside, Red was running out of strength. His body couldn't keep up, and eventually, he collapsed in Naples. The army rushed him back home, where he was admitted into a military hospital for 3 months. The public never really knew how serious it was. Newspapers gave only soft explanations, but Red himself was deeply shaken. While recovering, he developed a stutter and found it harder to perform the way he once did. One moment in the hospital stood out to him. He noticed a fellow soldier who refused to speak. Red tried to cheer him up by making him laugh, and when it worked, he realized laughter still had power to heal. That moment helped him begin to recover, but the scars of what he went through never fully went away. In September 1945, Red was officially discharged from the army. He later joked that he was the only celebrity who went into the military as a private and came out as a private. But behind the humor was a truth. He didn't take the easy road. He could have asked for a safer position or a Hollywood assignment, but he chose to serve like everyone else. The cost was high, both physically and emotionally. The breakdown, the stutter, and the pain stayed with him for the rest of his life. When the war ended, Red Skelton returned home a changed man. He was still the same beloved comedian that America knew, but there was a deeper weight behind his humor. Just 10 weeks after being discharged, on December 4, 1945, he was back on the air with the Raleigh cigarette program. Fans were happy to have him back, but those closest to him noticed the difference. Red laughed less when the cameras were off. He became more private, and even his characters began to carry a certain depth that reflected what he had gone through. In 1951, Red made the jump to television, and everything changed again. On September 30th, The Red Skelton Show premiered on NBC. And it wasn't just another program. It was a phenomenon. Viewers across the country could watch at the same time thanks to new coaxial cable technology. And millions tuned in. Red's comedy translated perfectly to TV. The very first episode featured him being dragged off stage by two invisible hands. It was funny but also dangerous. He was actually injured and had to retire the gag. Still, the debut made a huge impact. By the end of its first season, the show was ranked 4th nationwide. And at the 1952 Emmy Awards, Red won Best Comedian and his show won Best Comedy, beating even the legendary Milton Berle. For the next 2 decades, Red Skelton defined television comedy. In 1954, he moved the show to CBS, which gave him more freedom and time on air. By 1962, it had expanded to a full hour, becoming a Tuesday night tradition for families all over the country. Through the 1960s, the show was consistently in the top 20, and at its peak, it reached number 2 in the national ratings. Red wasn't just a comedian, he was an innovator. Between 1955 and 1960, he personally paid for color broadcasts of his show before the network was ready to switch, making him one of the first stars to push television into a new era. But in 1970, after nearly 20 years at the top, CBS abruptly canceled The Red Skelton Show. The ratings were still strong, but the network wanted younger viewers, and Red's loyal audience was older. For fans and for Red himself, the decision was shocking. It showed that even legends could be pushed aside for shifting trends. One of Red's most memorable creations was Freddy the Freeloader, introduced in 1952. Freddy was a gentle clown who had almost nothing but always kept his smile. The character was deeply personal for Red, inspired by memories of his father, who had been a circus clown before passing away. Freddy represented kindness, hope, and resilience. He never complained no matter how tough things were. Red once said Freddy was his purest character. Through Freddy's silent sketches called silent spots, Red told full stories without a single word, just expressions and movement. These became highlights of the show and later earned Freddy his own HBO special in 1981, long after the main series had ended. But away from the spotlight, Red's life was struck by tragedy. On May 10, 1958, his son Richard passed away from leukemia, just 10 days before what would have been his 10th birthday. The loss was devastating. Richard never truly understood how sick he was, as Red and his wife Georgia tried to protect him from the truth. Despite his suffering, Richard showed remarkable kindness in his final days. On his last full day, Red brought him a Sears catalog and told him to choose a birthday gift. Richard picked camping gear and a tent, but also a red blanket, not for himself but as a Mother's Day gift for Georgia. Even as he grew weaker, his thoughts were about others. Richard passed away at 8:36 p.m., with his parents by his side. His mother held back her tears while he was alive, because Richard had asked her not to cry in front of him. But that night she finally broke down. The red blanket became a powerful reminder of his love, and Georgia kept it close for the rest of her life. Red never recovered from the loss. He left Richard's room exactly as it was, with the toys and even a packed bag untouched, as though his son might walk back in at any moment. After Richard's death, Red often sat alone in his son's room, quietly sinking deeper into depression. What had once been a happy space full of toys and laughter turned into a shrine that carried all the memories he couldn't bring himself to speak about. His grief began to affect both his work and his marriage. He and Georgia had stayed strong for Richard's sake, but after their son was gone, the sorrow pulled them apart. Their marriage eventually ended. Even though Red kept performing, the sadness in his eyes became hard to hide. His comedy still made audiences laugh, but those closest to him could see the weight he carried. Away from the stage, painting became another outlet for him. He had started painting when he was just 5, during his childhood in the circus world after his father, a clown, passed away before Red was even born. He painted clowns, some happy, some lonely, and many of them reflected characters he had played, like Freddy the Freeloader. By the 1980s, his paintings were selling for tens of thousands of dollars each, with lithographs earning millions annually. His art ended up in private collections across the world, surprising many who only knew him as a comedian. For Red, though, painting had always been part of who he was, just beneath the surface. Despite never drinking alcohol himself, he was actually allergic to it. Red became famous for playing drunk characters on stage. His Guzzler's Gin sketch was one of his most popular, and audiences were convinced he had real experience with drinking. In truth, he perfected the act by carefully watching intoxicated people on the streets during his early days in vaudeville. He mimicked their slurred speech, stumbling movements, and unpredictable behavior with such accuracy that millions believed it was real. But the public didn't always see the whole man. While his TV image was wholesome and family-friendly, in private rehearsals with friends like Martha Ray, he often let loose with dirty jokes and biting sarcasm. The crew called these sessions the Red Skelton Dirty Hour, and they revealed a side of him few outside the circle knew. His third wife, Lothian, once explained that Red had a private place in his mind where he stored jokes that couldn't be told on stage. It was his way of releasing pressure while giving the world the clean, family-oriented version of himself. For nearly 2 decades, The Red Skelton Show was one of the top programs on American television, ranking in the top 10 for most of its run. But in 1970, CBS canceled it, not because of ratings which were still strong, but because of the so-called rural purge. The network wanted to appeal to younger, urban audiences, so they cut shows they considered too old or rural. Alongside The Red Skelton Show, other beloved programs like the Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, and Mayberry RFD were also removed. The cancellation devastated Red. He had been in Las Vegas when he got the news and said, "My heart has been broken." For nearly 20 years, he had been one of television's most trusted entertainers, yet the network treated him as if he no longer mattered. Lothian later said Red never fully recovered from the betrayal. NBC tried to bring him back for one season in 1970, but the format was changed, the cast was altered, and the show lost its familiar charm. Ratings fell quickly, and by 1971, the show was cancelled for good. Even though television turned away from him, Red stayed true to himself. He refused to adapt to the new wave of vulgar or edgy comedy, insisting that his audience deserved clean, respectful humor. He once said, "I'm not going to have my audience and their mothers, fathers, children, and grandchildren hear me recite what they can read on bathroom walls." Instead, he kept performing live shows, often doing as many as 70 a year. People continued to show up, laugh, and love him. He proved that family-friendly comedy still had power. In 1980, another controversy surrounded him. 13 of his former writers filed a lawsuit after learning that Red had once written in his will that all tapes of The Red Skelton Show should be destroyed after his death. If carried out, this would have erased decades of work and eliminated syndication, which also meant no royalties for the writers. Red explained that he wrote it during a dark period when he felt abandoned by the industry, but eventually, he changed his mind. He allowed episodes to be preserved, ensuring his legacy lived on. Tragedy struck again in 1976, when his ex-wife Georgia took her own life on May 10th, the anniversary of their son Richard's death. Georgia had battled depression and alcoholism for years and never recovered from losing Richard. After her passing, Red was devastated once again and stopped performing for over a decade. In 1973, Red had married Lothian Toland, the daughter of famed cinematographer Greg Toland. Red was 60, she was 36, and together they moved to a quiet ranch in Anza, California. They raised horses, cared for bonsai trees, and avoided Hollywood's noise. Lothian became Red's source of peace. He wrote her love letters every single day, many of which she only discovered after his death. She also took on the role of preserving his memory, making sure that Red's work and legacy were not forgotten. Even without television, Red never truly stopped performing. He continued entertaining audiences through live shows, keeping his promise to spread laughter, even while carrying deep personal pain. Red Skelton spent his life going wherever people wanted to laugh. He performed at Carnegie Hall, on college campuses, and in casinos, always bringing joy to audiences of every kind. At the same time, he poured his energy into painting, focusing mostly on clowns. Collectors loved his work, and some of his paintings sold for more than $80,000 each. At his peak, his art earned him as much as $2.5 million a year. But behind all the success, the grief he carried never went away. Every laugh he gave the audience was touched by the sadness of his personal losses, and every smile seemed to come from a place of pain that never fully healed. Red Skelton passed away on September 17, 1997, at the age of 84. The cause was pneumonia, and he died at Eisenhower Medical Center in Rancho Mirage, California. His final years were quiet but not without purpose. He continued painting, performing, and working, but friends often said he never regained his full joy after losing his son Richard and his former wife Georgia. His clown paintings, bright and cheerful on the outside, carried a much deeper story underneath. They reflected the life of a man who devoted himself to making others laugh while privately mourning the tragedies that marked his own life. In 2013, on what would have been his 100th birthday, Red's hometown of Vincennes, Indiana, honored him with the opening of the Red Skelton Museum of American Comedy. Located on the Vincennes University campus, the museum became more than just an exhibition. It holds his original scripts, costumes, rare film footage, over 200 of his paintings, and personal items donated by his wife Lothian. The museum also hosts events such as the America's Clown Award and the Laughter Film Festival, continuing Red's mission of spreading joy. The Red Skelton Research Archive, now part of the Indiana Historical Society, preserves thousands of his scripts, photographs, and musical scores, ensuring that future generations will always have access to his work. Red left behind unforgettable characters like Clem Kadiddlehopper, Freddy the Freeloader, and the Mean Whittle Kid. These weren't just silly gags, they had personality, charm, and heart. They became part of American culture, shaping comedy for decades to come. Many performers, including Robin Williams and Jim Carrey, looked to Red as a source of inspiration and guidance. The Red Skelton Show ran for 20 years, earned multiple Emmy Awards, and became a staple in homes across America. Even today, his laughter continues to echo through the world of entertainment. Red Skelton's legacy is not just in his comedy, but in the love, kindness, and joy he shared with millions. His spirit lives on every time someone remembers one of his jokes, one of his characters, or simply the way he made people feel.